It's my pleasure to invite back to the stage Deacon Mitzie Schafer for her second part of her keynote address. Mitzie, welcome.
I love that story. I love all the stories. Welcome back this morning. I hope you've had your coffee, not spilled it on someone's table. It's a little dig at my husband there. I've had my Diet Mountain Dew, and I am delighted that you are in here and not out there milling around. So thank you for being back for this second part of our conversation together. I'd like to start with a reading from Luke 7. Sometime later, Jesus went to the town called Nain. His disciples and a large crowd went along with him. He approached the town gate just when a dead person was being carried out. He was the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. A large crowd from the town was with her, and when the Lord saw her, he felt sorry for her. And so he said, "Don't cry." When he went up and touched the coffin, those carrying it stood still, and Jesus said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began talking, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. The people were filled with wonder and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." And the news about Jesus spread all through Judea and the whole country. Yesterday, our time together left off with me working to make a case for congregations and individuals inside congregations, so all of you, connecting more fully with the story of God's greatest deposit as a way for us to share that great deposit in our church communities and communication. I call these types of deposits impact stories. I created this process while working at Epworth Children's Home. I needed a way to help donors understand that their generosity to the ministry actually paid to transform the lives of our clients, of the children who were there. After a great deal of testing and tweaking and evaluation to determine the best method for telling an impact story that would actually improve engagement with the ministry, a structure was born, and I call it CAGA. CAGA with a C, not an S. A saga with an S is a long, drawn-out story. I often think about youth romance novels like Twilight and sparkly vampires. But a saga with a C is an impact story. The C stands for a change that happens in someone's life. In order for there to be a change, there has to be a before the change and an after the change. I think the King's story has a before the change and an after the change. When I talk about change, what I mean is that it's about the feelings and the behaviors that someone's dealing with. There's a void, a loss, something missing in someone's life, and somehow that need is met by an agent of change. So the A, C is change, A is agent of change. We know in the church that God is the agent of change, working through our programs and our people to help us feel connected. God is working with us to help us create belonging and peace and welcome. And this happens through our people, through relationship. The people in the church offer the programs and the ministries like pastoral care and worship and Bible studies and so much more. The programs and the ministries we provide are possible because of the G, the gift that pays for the agent of change. And we get the gift because of an ask, the last A. So change, agent of change, gift, and ask. We're going to focus on the change and the agent of change today. The CAGA model has worked amazingly well in the nonprofits that I served, and eventually I was asked to begin teaching it in congregations. Two things happened that I didn't expect. First, it was honestly harder to teach people how to find and tell their impact story than I thought. When I started talking to people about their church and what their church meant to them, what I got back was something like this. Well, I was born in this church. I was baptized in this church. I was confirmed to this church. I serve on council. I was married in this church. Oh, and I served, I helped with Vacation Bible School, and I have a plot right out there in the cemetery. So, I told you I would mean what I say and say what I mean, and really, who cares? I heard this banter so many times in the beginning that I started referring to it as the church resume. It doesn't tell me anything about what God is up to in your congregation and in your life. If we really want to hear about the change that happens in someone's life because of the agent of change, because of God, we have to do a more intentional job of asking the right questions to identify it. Maybe you noticed the 2 new questions on the bio sheet for those who were nominated this year. All you new secretary nominees will notice it soon. Before, the questions were really a church resume. And this time we asked about more personal questions, more impact-related questions. Your most joyful memory or a time when the church supported you. Those are impact questions. In May, I spent 6 hours teaching the CAGA model to a small group in the Northeastern Ohio Synod Assembly. After the first 3 hours in the morning of training and then lunch, I gave people the choice to turn to their neighbor and to practice interviewing each other. But I also gave, if they didn't want to do that, a choice to come up to the front of the classroom with me, and I would talk them through how to practice so they wouldn't have to talk to each other. 12 people of the 50 plus in the room actually came up to the front. So I know my people, okay? They were my I don't want to talk people, my don't make me turn to my neighbor people, my people. Mitch was sitting right in front of me in this globby kind of circle that we had made as we pulled our chairs all together. And as we processed how to ask questions, Mitch spoke up a couple times, but then he asked a question, I can't remember what it was, but I said, you know, Mitch, how do you feel if I practice on you? Can I practice on you so they can see it? I mean, he's the don't make me turn to my neighbor guy, so he hesitated, but he did say yes. And so I asked him, because I didn't know him, never met him, how did you get to the church where you worship now? He told me that in 1987, he had moved across town. He had left a church that he loved and a church that loved him. But it was too far for him to drive. And he felt he needed to find a new church home in his new community. He showed up at Advent Lutheran on Easter morning. He said the carpets and the pews felt like his other church, and that helped it feel like home. I must admit, in my globby circle, there were some scrunched up faces. Carpets and pews? Are you serious? So I asked, okay, so after worship that day, what happened? He said, well, worship was nice. And then on the way out of the building, two guys from the softball team approached him and they invited him to practice the next day. And he went. Okay, so I asked how practice went the next day. He said, I decided to go back. Oh my gosh. After a little bit of back and forth, I was feeling like I wasn't getting anything from him. And my practice session where I was trying to teach people how to do this was gonna flop. So I said, okay, Mitch, is Advent your church home? Yes, he said. Okay, because so far you've told me about the softball team and carpet and pews. Is it really about the carpet and the pews? There was a long pause. See, Mitch was deciding if I had made enough deposits, if he could trust me with his story. Okay, he said, I'll go ahead and tell you. Mitch was holding back. He shared that 3 months after he first worshiped at Advent on that Easter morning, that his father died. In his very calm and steady voice, he shared that at the funeral, he was trying to be strong for his mother and his sister, be the man of the family now. And then during the service, he looked up, and through the door came the entire softball team. And he said at that moment, he lost it. There was no more being strong. And with a tear in his eye, he said, those guys barely even knew me. But here came 15 white guys walking into a black funeral. They barely even knew me. But on that day, they became my family. After that, Mitch shared that the reason he had gone across town was because he had just been divorced. And now he was a single parent. The softball team members invited them into their homes, and their spouses made sure that his son had a good snack, and their children played together, and then he opened his home so they could come in as well. They became my family, and the church became my home. Over the years, the team has continued to support each other. That was 1987. As children move away to college, as illnesses set in, as life throws curveballs, The team is still strong and supportive and together. A little slower than before, but together. In order for there to be change in someone's life, there has to be a before the change. Mitch's before was losing the life he knew and the things that not only felt like home, but his actual home. He lost his marriage, his house, his church that he loved and that loved him, and he was looking for belonging. Not necessarily a place with carpet and pews, but people he could play with and laugh with and eat with and be vulnerable with. Mitch was a lifelong Lutheran, baptized, confirmed, council member, synod delegate. But the softball team was how God helped Mitch find those things that he was seeking in his life. The Spirit filled Mitch with relationships. See, the agent of change always boils down to relationship. It is not the programs that we offer. It's the programs that bring us together. I have listened to hundreds of faith stories now, and the agent of change is always relationship. God using people to meet the needs and the hopes of neighbors. So that was the first thing I learned, the first thing that happened when I started teaching CAGA in churches, realizing that people needed help moving from a church resume to an impact story. The second thing that happened that I didn't expect were all the emails that I got back of people reflecting on the practice. I've known this person for 30 years, and I had no idea this was part of their story. After Mitch shared his story, his pastor, who had been sitting right next to him, pulled me aside. I've known Mitch for 10 years, and I had no idea that was a part of his story. Knowing the impact our congregations have on the lives of others changes us. When we see people for their story instead of someone who's supposed to volunteer or tithe or fill a pew, we can't help but feel the relevance of our work together. In our gospel reading from Luke and all through the Gospels, we hear story after story about how Jesus was the agent of change in someone's life and how the impact of that encounter with the agent of change spread across the region. A mother lost her son. She was going to be completely alone. She was grieving, and Jesus heals her son and gives him back to his mother. I mentioned yesterday that a common theme my consulting colleagues and I hear across the church right now is, where are they? Where have all the pre-COVID people gone? Why aren't they coming back? When will they come back? Will they ever come back? But what we aren't talking about, though, are the people who are coming back, the people who remain. One of the first questions I get from those in my CAGA training is, who should I interview? Here's the deal. Every single person in your congregation, everyone there is coming back for a reason. And if they're there, then impact has happened. and they want to be there, and God is up to something, and they have a story. They have a story, and you, friends, have a story. And sharing your story is part of God's great deposit. Over the last couple of weeks, our church has been telling a story. It sort of feels like every couple of years we have a new story to focus on that gets our attention, and every single time feelings of fear and resentment and hopelessness bubble up. These messages that capture our attention and consume us sound like the church is dying. Numbers are dropping. Needing to vote on whether or not some people are fully welcome. Racism, lack of trained leadership that damages trust and transparency. These are the stories that we've been hearing. Withdrawals are always noisier than deposits. But inside of all the noise and withdrawal, Stacy's story gets lost. Mitch's story gets lost. First Lutheran and Advent Lutheran stories get lost. God's story gets lost, drowned out by the withdrawals and the noise. Withdrawal language leads to a downward spiral. It takes consistent, intentional deposits to turn it around, to make us right with the bank again. The world wants us to believe that it's bad, hurtful, hateful, toxic. But I get to spend every day listening to churches across this country find their connection back to God's great deposit through the individual stories of their congregation members. And these deposits are changing them. Knowing them and hearing them is changing them. We get so much noise in our inboxes and on social media. And so today I want to challenge us as a church to make more deposits. Tell the impact of what God's greatest deposit is doing in the lives of your people. Because I assure you, all is not lost. Even for those who aren't coming back, God's great deposits are still being made. God is up to something, and just because we don't see it doesn't mean it isn't so. Okay, so as our actionable for this morning's session, I promised that to you. I invite you to feel good about your church, to reconnect with what God is up to in the lives of our people right here in little old South Carolina. The Synod office has provided a lovely storybook. It was in your snack bag yesterday before an amazing worship service. It is filled with stories from congregations and our institutions right here at home. And it shows quite clearly what God is up to in this place. Read them. Soak them in. Let them cancel out some of the withdrawals that have been made in your life. I also invite you to begin thinking about the impact that God has had in your own life through your congregation. What are you most thankful for? How has the church been there for you? What is your most joyous moment with the church? Thanks for listening. Thanks for sitting through this. Thanks for helping add more deposits to the world. I'll see you back after lunch when we talk about our hoped for story.